Good.
You've got this amazing sparkle.
I know, I have pictures.
Oh, is he showing the dog? The blessed child. She looks like Yoda, or I mean, like or no, like those creatures from the Star Wars thing. What were they called?
I'm over there against
14 pounds?
Ewoks. She has that Ewok thing on. Jimmy.
Stay awake during the boring
My son's
She's in charge. You're not.
absolutely fine for me. I'm trying to find a shot I've got that So my daughter's girlfriend's in high school.
Well, it's about that time.
She knew that I was missing my dog the other night before. And she saw this dog on Facebook. And it was from Sunshine.
We're starting.
So they found her on the streets about with her feet.
But I think Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Forum. So glad you could be here. Was Thanksgiving great for everyone? I trust it was. It was really relaxing for my family. We had my brothers-in-law over, so it was great. Come on in, grab a seat. And Chuck tells me, Chuck is our speaker today. You all know Chuck Benson. He tells me he has a lot to get through, so I'm going to make this short and sweet, but I'll just tell you the rest of our schedule this season. Next week we have Becky Kaiser. She's the founder of Trampled Rose, which is a humanitarian outfit based in Africa and Ethiopia. She has lived there full time for the last 22 years, and so she'll be speaking next week on Trampled Rose, and you won't want to miss that. She works with the women in Ethiopia that are suffering from obstetric fistula. It's a wonderful organization. I used to work with her many years ago on her website design, so you'll want to be here next week. In a couple weeks from then, December 21st, we have Judge Hall and his son Eric. And they're coming back to speak about some Supreme Court cases, so you will not want to miss that. It's always a special event when we have the Hall boys here. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck now. He is going to grace us with more of his world travels and an interesting topic today. So let's welcome Chuck, please.
Thanks. Thanks so much for braving the bitter cold. It feels like Akron, Ohio out there, not Colorado. Show of hands, how many people have heard of Keith Critchlow? Okay, not very many. Well, I think you're going to be surprised and amazed at this fellow who, in very many ways, as you'll see just momentarily, sort of even early on, he's already working with divine geometry, and here he's shown arguing very vehemently with a guy named R. Buckminster Fuller. We go back to the geodesic dome and tensegrity, and R. Buckminster Fuller, he was pretty close to. I'm going to set the stage for a larger context here, because a lot of us are maybe old enough, as I'm looking out in this crowd, to remember people like Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin.
Yes.
I studied violin and viola from first grade to college, so the first classical album I bought was the Mendelssohn Opus 64 Violin Concerto, as played by Yehudi Menuhin. Menuhin, believe it or not, did an album called West Meets East with Ravi Shankar. Okay, most of us think that it's this guy that discovered Ravi Shankar. It was Yehudi Menuhin. Yehudi Menuhin was good friends with George Harrison and introduced Harrison to Ravi Shankar, the classical Jewish violinist. Okay, which is, I think this is a great photo of Ravi Shankar and George Harrison. So the context here is that everything that's happening in the 1960s, Keith Critchlow is a little bit of a part of, because he knew all these guys. He knew Ravi Shankar, he knew George Harrison, he knew Yehudi Menuhin. He was very good friends with this fellow named Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell taught at Sarah Lawrence for years and years and was published through the Bollingen Press and the Princeton University Press. And The Powers of Myth as sort of a, with Bill Moyers, it was a whole PBS series. I don't know if any of us caught The Power of Myth.
Yes.
And it's really interesting here. It's too small for you to see, but I'll read it. Campbell has become the rarest of intellectuals in American life, a serious thinker who has been embraced by popular culture, which is really true. So how does this fit in? I'm just going to take a sidebar with Bill Moyers interviewing Joseph Campbell, because a lot of you were here when this was happening, but I see some faces that might not have known. At the same time, we had the culture wars that were going on in Colorado Springs with Amendment 2. And there's Bill Moyers, and Bill Moyers interviewed our blessed Reverend Jim White sitting in the front row here. And Jim had a platform with this church, and the church had a platform with Jim. We were a bastion of sanity in the midst of insanity with Amendment 2, which, by the way, Justice Kennedy wrote the opinion. It went all the way to the Supreme Court and got thrown out. But everything's old is new again. Let's kind of wonder if 25, 30 years on, maybe we're not going to be visiting the same sort of legislation again. Sidebar there. So let's get back to Keith Critchlow and sacred patterns in Islamic art and architecture. And I'm going to take this opportunity to start passing some things around for you to take a look at. And the wood inlay and bone inlay is called terracilla, and it's done in Granada in Andalusia, okay? And the metalwork that will get passed is called damashim or damasquinado, and it comes from Toledo. The important thing is that these are all Islamic patterns, okay? Sacred Islamic patterns, and they're on little tchotchkes that I purchased. I was lucky enough to be leading a group to Spain last October, and I was able to pick up a couple of these. And so no early Christmas presents for anybody. They all need to come back forward, right? So all of that I'm showing to you here are all watercolors and designs of Keith Critchlow. And he also wrote Islamic patterns. And I would say he's important enough, and I'll say this probably right now and a little bit later. The reason that we go to Andalusia and we go to Cordoba and Granada in part is because of Keith Critchlow. Because most of us would only be visiting Christian Spain, not Andalusian or Muslim Spain right after World War II. But his making us familiar with these kinds of patterns from his notebooks, and not just Islam, but sacred geometry in general. What's coming towards you as an endless limit curve is something called the golden mean of Greece, okay? This is the golden rectangle. And it's called a limit, or actually the name is misconstrued. It's a limitless curve because it descends towards infinity. It always keeps happening, and you can dive all the way down into it or all the way out of it. it's infinity in both directions. He was interested in man occupying the square and the circle. This is Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci from the High Renaissance. I'm going to burst everybody's bubble. This is a lie and it doesn't work. Most of us have what's called either a +8 index or a -8 index. So most of us are either taller from our feet to the top of our head than our hands outstretched. Very few people are 0.8 index, as this particular individual has shown. I don't think there's a Vitruvian man or woman in this room. You're either plus or -8 index. Now, the burning question is, are you more intelligent if you're plus or -8 index? That's existentialism. I'm not going to go there. So Keith Critchlow had, believe it or not, coloring books, not for children, but for adults. And they were a big seller in the late 1960s. And this is somebody that's actually tracing from a Keith Critchlow original design. These are all not ancient 9th, 10th, and 11th century Islamic patterns. They're repatterning on the part of Keith Critchlow, personally. This is all Keith Critchlow reworking certain geometric patterns from Islam. Islam is looking at 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And rotations and tessellations around certain axes are sort of paramount. These are all original Keith Critchlow. That's an original Keith Critchlow painting, watercolor up here. And this is the Keith Critchlow pattern that was actually generated into a tile floor that I'll show you in a little while. He, of course, is being inspired by Georgian lock knot tile patterns from the Alhambra in Andalusia. So this is all Nazarid patterning that we're looking at here from 11th, 12th, 13th century. This is Nazarid tile from the wainscot inside the Corte de Leones in the Alhambra. There's a Keith Critchlow design. Here's, I think, one of the most, this is exquisite on his part, because he sort of departs, not necessarily Islamic patterning, but he almost goes into a non-Euclidean world of the curves that come and start and generate and come back and lock into each other with 6 hexagons and 6 stars of David, and then exterior stars of David, although they're 6-pointed stars in Islam, but sorry about that. Islam gets itself the Star of David from Judaism. This is a unfinished, purposely unfinished Keith Critchlow Islamic sacred net. And it's pretty big. That's about 8 feet in diameter. What has been passed around to you comes to rest and roost with original Islamic woodwork. And then this particular pentagonal table, for scale, this is about 30 inches across. The wandering fret design and the whole pattern here was put together at a shop called Terracia, the Laguna shop, and that inlaid woodwork in the octagon and hexagon I passed around, I bought at this particular shop, which is inside the Alhambra. But I think what's important to realize is this is Islamic inspired. That's pure Keith Critchlow from 1972. And you can buy this particular table there. You can buy this table next week for $5,400 from that Laguna Terracia shop at the Alhambra if you're so moved, from the original Keith Critchlow design. So here's the inside of that particular shop, and they do some amazing inlaid Terracia here. It's world class. And in fact, she's working on one that gives you sort of a good idea of the piece that she's working on as a master craftsman. There's the piece, the hexagon and the octagonal box that I was passing around. And then also the Islamic pattern from the great city of Toledo, which used to be Christian, then became Islamic, then went back to being Christian. Okay. There's a Jewish synagogue in Toledo that was allowed to be built under Christian rule by Islamic craftsmen, if one can imagine. This is not a very big piece. It's inlaid gold and platinum on nickel steel. And I was thinking, well, I'm going to buy a 14 or 18 inch platinum. And then when I saw it was 11,000 euro, I said, I guess I'm not going to be buying Exactly. So he also did a piece called The Sacred Geometry of Flowers. You may know that work by Keith Critchlow. In fact, I remember looking at this particular, let's see, what's going on here? Sorry about that. Bear with me here. I remember seeing that particular book at the Chinook bookstore, which no longer exists. He also wrote Order in Space, Keith Critchlow. That's sort of a small image, sorry about that. He was very, very concerned for a while in his study of sacred geometry with labyrinths. And this is an aerial view on the z-axis of one of the greatest at the Cathedral of Chartres in France, the Ile-de-France. This particular labyrinth. Labyrinths are different than mazes. You can't get lost in a labyrinth. So the name's a misnomer because it's based on an ancient Greek myth, the labyrinths, or double acts of Greece. But if you stick with it, you will start and end up in the center, whereas a maze is a little bit different. He was very considerate in terms of order of space and the interest in the Platonic solids, the tetra, octa, hexa, and the dodeca and icasa. They're all put together with equilateral triangles or squares and pentagons. And Plato, right here in this great mural inside the Vatican with Plato and Aristotle, it's called the School of Athens, one of his great, great, great murals in the Stanza della Signatura of the Vatican. These are the only forms in the universe, at least our universe that we understand, that have equal edges, equal sides, equal faces, and equal angles. There's only 5 of them. And they were discovered about 2,350 years ago. And out of those grows something called the Archimedean solids, out of the Platonic solids. This one, if you put it in white and black leather, you'll recognize is the more famous football game that's played in the rest of the world besides us. Okay, right now, especially with Notre Dame last night, I couldn't even stay up long enough to watch the whole game. But football for the rest of the world is soccer. If you inflate that truncated icosahedron by Archimedes, you'll get a soccer ball. I think Keith Critchlow would like what's going on with computer graphics and AI. I don't think he would abhor it at all. I really don't. So here's an original Keith Critchlow graphic. He was taking a lot of these forms and inflating them and placing all those forms on a spheroidal surface or non-Euclidean. He was interested in both Euclidean and non-Euclidean sacred geometries. He even wrote something called Sound in Space, which if you're a physicist or mathematician in here, that's ridiculous. There is no sound in space. There's no atmosphere for sound to propagate in space. Okay? If you go back and watch all of the Star Wars movies, you'll see even in the first one an Imperial cruiser and you hear the rumble. You're not going to hear any rumble in space. There's nothing, there's no oxygen or nitrogen molecules to move. But anyhow, he's talking about the divine sound in space and the sound of the divine spheres, which has been a preoccupation with both the East and the West for many, many, many years, what we call the divine propagation. And this is important because this young woman right here is carrying an Islamic graphic in metal. You see it? You know what it means? It means propagated sound. It's part of a large mural that's going to be constructed. And even inside the sacred, what we would call text that implies Allah, and I'm going to just say it again like I said earlier this past month, Allah is Yahweh, is Jehovah. It's all the same God. There's probably a lot of neocon thinking that would want you to think otherwise. That is not the case. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all pray to the same God of Abraham. And I know I'm probably going to be cast into neocon hell by saying such a thing. But there it is. He is also concerned, and we're aware of what is called a geometric kind of font in sacred Islam. It's called Kufic, K-U-F-I-C, Kufic text. It almost looks like a circuit board for an IBM circuit, but this is Kufic text from a building that's 11th century. And he's bringing that awareness of Kufic text. Here's another Keith Critchlow hand drawing. And there's very, very elegant. Some of these are about 2 feet by 2 feet. Even to the point where somebody throws down the gauntlet and says, I bet you can't make a sacred diagram with a spirograph. And Keith Critchlow goes, well, give me a spirograph. And he makes a whole series of sacred diagrams just with the spirograph. And I know a lot of, how many of us had this when we were, yeah, absolutely. We're dating ourselves. So in terms of architecture, we're going to look at the pentagonal star and the square interlaid on this pedimented classical building. That's a Keith Critchlow diagram. But I consider him a much greater sacred geometer than architect, although he did 18 buildings during his life, mostly sacred spaces. And this is an important one. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spheres. And it is a diagram for a building that was built at the Critchlow Center. And we'll come back to that. And here's a section through one of the really important rooms at the Critchlow Center in Hampshire in southern England. So let's look at a few of the sacred buildings that he did. He starts out pretty humble and small. He designed a whole series of yurts. In fact, this, believe it or not, is in a courtyard in London at a museum, this particular yurt. And it's neat, but it's not as neat as this. This is a Masjid-i-Jami, which in Arabic means Friday Congregational Mosque. Masjid is the Arabic, mosque is the French. And this is the Masjid-i-Jami, believe it or not, in Cambridge, England. So the Muslim congregation there hired this Anglican highbrow white guy to do this modern mosque for them, and he begins to develop the elements that are going to be the building blocks for this particular masjid, and there we see it. And we'll get closer and closer to it. It's really a tour de force of both ancient proportion of Islam and sort of modern rendition. It is covered with Kufic text on the bias at 45 degrees. These are all raised bricks. This is part of the exterior of the mosque. And he's using that influence of Kufic text and bringing it into the modern era. Here's some more, this is a gorgeous Kufic building from Samarkand, this particular tomb. There's more Kufic text. And it's different than the cursive Muslim text, more geometric. So there's the dome, and here's the courtyard in front. We're about to enter into the narthex, and this is a standard building block that he uses, and believe it or not, it's all structural glue lambs that have been bent so beautifully. Seems that would be impossible in wood. Here's the glass entrance, and here we are, where all the shoes are placed neatly. Okay, so you're taking off your shoes, and if you're a good Muslim, you're doing ablution, and we'll see what that's about in a second. So here's the building block structurally, and we're looking up at these, and we'll get to there's the main part of the masjid. He also designed the mihrab and the minbar. So the mihrab is in what's called the Qibla wall, and this is the wall that roughly faces Mecca, okay? So if you find this sacred niche, the mihrab, you know which direction to face to pray, because all Muslims are like iron filings all around the world. And the magnet is the Kaaba in holy Mecca. And so if you're in Iceland, you face south. If you're in Johannesburg, you face north and just a skosh east. If you're in Detroit, you face east. If you're in Hong Kong, you face west. But he designed all of this. They trusted him enough to design all this. Now, there's a lot fancier minbars. This one's in Cairo at the Ibn Tulun Mosque. Here's another one in Turkey. And you're going, well, this has a stair up to a high point. This doesn't. It's because the muezzin uses modern electronics to speak to the congregation. In the old days, you had to get that individual up high enough to be able to have the voice propagate. Now we've got speaker systems. So here are the faithful facing the Qibla wall with the mihrab in this gorgeous, modern, yet proportionally classic Keith Critchlow looking up at the dome. Isn't this an amazing sacred space? I think what's more amazing is that he knew the imam here because they played in the same bridge club. And the imam said to him, you know, I just can't find anybody worth their salt. Would you like to do our mosque? Trusted him enough. And this is the result.
Wow.
Now, there's other architects. Shigeru Ban is one that have taken a little bit of this bent glue lamb kind of thinking and not actually copied Critchlow, but are in that same spirit. I just think it's an elegant building. Purists don't tend to like it. Because of that, he is asked to come to Temple Mount, to the Alaska Mosque, and this particular minbar next to the mihrab is partly burned, and it is so destroyed by worms that it is deemed unsafe. And so they hire him to redesign this, and we'll see the imam with the finished product redesigned and supervised by Keith Critchlow on Temple Mount. This is probably the third most important mosque or masjid in all of Islam. The first, of course, is the great masjid in Mecca. The next is the Prophet's home or house in Medina, and then this. So that puts him at a pretty high level. He's asked by Hindus in Putahari to design their new hospital with sacred geometry in mind, in Putahari. And then there's the Krishnamurti Center, which is in Brockwood Park, which is this gigantic park in Hampshire, part of the National Trust, a little tiny English village called Brandine, and this building right here is the Krishnamurti Center by Keith Critchlow. Who is Krishnamurti? Well, that'd be a lecture in and of itself. I'm not enough of an expert on him, but I will say Krishnamurti is going, do not follow a minister or a pastor, okay, or a museum. Do not follow dogma. Listen to the Godhead in your own heart and figure it out for yourself. And he had a huge following in the 60s and early 70s. Anybody remember Krishnamurti? Yeah, absolutely. But look at, there's the town. Can't even call it a town, it's an English village. Here's the center, and it is surrounded by 480 acres of the most beautiful Southern English countryside you can imagine. And that's part of the joy of it, is its setting is spectacular. And it's a retreat. Anybody here can go to the Krishnamurti Center, okay? You can even get a scholarship if it's a financial, if it's problematic for you. So here's the Krishnamurti Foundation. That's the outside of their brochure a couple of years ago. And here it is. There's the drawing by Keith Critchlow, what he intended, and it pretty much is built exactly as you see. And again, this is the diagram of the West Range, East Range, the great courtyard, enclosed courtyard, the solarium room and the quiet room, and it's all laid out on the Route 3 triangle and on the 45-degree triangle, sacred space, even to the point where he's going back to Hindu and Renaissance and Buddhist diagrams, and there's an aerial shot of it, which sort of really, it's all filled in and grown in, and these are all herbs that are grown here aromatically that help with not only concentration, but with meditation. Even the section through parts of the quiet room, it's all based on divine geometry. There's Critchlow's signing that drawing. And he's going back to a lot of ancient mandala diagrams, even two tetrahedra that collide with one another inside the sphere. This kind of sacred geometry is to be found everywhere, even on, these are not glue lamps, these are actual oaken beams that are all hand hewn. So it's built in the old way of a hammer beam roof, or the old roofs and structures of roofs in England. We sort of see it being assembled here. And the garden area. They're finishing some of the stucco in here. What did Keith Critchlow have to say about gypsum board? So this is all plaster and lath, and he always used to quote Louis Kahn. I asked the brick what it wanted to be, and it said an arch. And I asked the gypsum board sheet what it wanted to be, and it said, I don't give a crap. So he did not use, he used the old plaster lath technique, which is a lot more expensive. There's the solarium room, and just the setting is spectacular. And it feels way old, a lot older than 1986. And here we are on the inside. There's sort of a great room that's used for both coffee and eating, and it can be used for meetings as well. The accommodations there are quite pleasant. And he wanted you to think about his favorite Norman building, looking at this, because his favorite Norman building was the round church at the University of Cambridge. No, we would say Romanesque on the continent, 1093. But in England, we say Norman. We don't say Romanesque. More of the accommodations. And if that's not enough, he rubs elbow with this guy when he's still HRH, okay? When he's still the Prince of Wales. And he published a number of books on architecture, and he devotes page after page to Keith Critchlow and his divine proportionality. This guy was really big on bringing back the idea that of the old town in England, and working with a guy named Leon Creer and Robert Creer. Anyhow, Keith Critchlow is really good friends with now Charles III, I think, is the designator, King of England. But back to just some of the landscape in and around the Krishnamurti Center. Gorgeous. The landscape there is part of the National Trust. Here's Keith Critchlow being interviewed by a guy from the BBC at the actual Krishnamurti Institute. And of course, it was finished in 1987, but they put the cornerstone is 86, because that's the year that Krishnamurti died, passed on the walls here. Now, brings us all the way back. How does Keith Critchlow fit in with Colorado? This is an aerial shot of the Sangre de Cristo, the blood of Christ. And on the western side of those mountains, if you come down to around here or so, you come to a little town called Crestone. Well, Crestone's a really unusual place because there are Christian, Buddhist, Zen, Hindu, Krishnamurti. There are a whole lot of different religious traditions, 4 different Buddhist traditions, within about 1.5 or 2 miles of each other in this little place in the San Luis Valley. I don't know if any of you have been there. Maybe some of you have. It's an eclectic kind of place. This building, covered with snow, looking up at Kit Carson Peak and up towards the Crestones, is called the Lindisfarne Chapel. And it was designed by Keith Critchlow, which is this huge dome space with a stone and brick paved floor and not terribly comfortable seating. In fact, they call this the damn Critchlow bench in 360 degrees because padding has been made for all our derrieres if we're going to be in here for an extended period of time. If you've sat on stone for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. I think it's different when you're 68 than when you're 18. I don't know why that is, but there it is. And so it admits light, and it has some sconce, beautiful sconce light at night, but the dome is kind of interesting there. And we're looking at the large interior and the small exterior shot. It is based on a place called Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne is a very sacred place in Great Britain, and there is a castle there, the Lindisfarne Castle, which is unbelievably picturesque. What's more important, though, is something called the Lindisfarne Gospels, which, along with the Book of Kells in the 8th and 9th century, are great illuminated manuscripts. And maybe the most famous page from at least the Lindisfarne Gospels is this page. It's called the Chi Rho. And we see the X, the graphic, which is spectacular on vellum. Keith Critchlow studied the Book of Kells and the Book of Lindisfarne. And here we are in Crestone. We have a Chortine from the Tibetan and Nepalese Buddhist traditions. We have a Catholic church. We have a ziggurat. We have different orders of Buddhism. There's a Hindu temple there. There's other ecumenical space there. There's a holy Zen retreat of Zen Buddhism, and these are two of the spaces at that Zen retreat. He lectured here and taught seminars here for years, Keith Critchlow. And there he is with his partner, and where are they? They are in a niche at the Alhambra in Granada, in Andalusia. Here's a Critchlow inlaid design that, as still Prince of Wales, Prince Charles is at the Critchlow Institute. Actually, he's visiting. There's a Critchlow mandala. And again, his work with flowers. So there's, I think, three levels or three takeaways about Critchlow I want you to remember. First is divine geometry, but most especially introducing us in the West to Muslim Islamic divine geometry in all shapes and forms, from the inlaid terracia that was already happening. And I only see one of those things, so we're going to need the other two to come up back forward. Okay, I'm just joking. But isn't this an amazing pentagonal table on his part? So he's taking hundreds and hundreds of years of the geometry of the sacredness of Islam and retranslating it into, which is now, that design, believe it or not, we know something called the Greek key. This is called the Critchlow key in terms of design. I mean, he would smile probably knowing that it's referred to that. The next thing is that he did sacred space in an ecumenical way. He designed mosques or masjids. He designed retreat centers. I'm not even showing you the Hindu temples that he designed, and Buddhist spaces and Zen retreat spaces we saw a little bit of, and that ecumenical Lindisfarne Chapel, and just the whole idea of the micro and macro nature of that which is ecumenical. Lindisfarne Chapel, and then this great masjid in Cambridge. And this is an octagonal. You can buy this for $12,000, okay? It is a Keith Critchlow designed sacred Islamic octagon with all perfect pieces, but guess what? They're all lapis and red coral and not tourmaline, but malachite, all different kinds of semi-precious stones. Size of that is about 4 feet in diameter, okay? You can order one for Christmas if you like. I think Ibn Rashad was one of the great Islamic geometers of the 9th and 10th centuries. Critchlow is in that same tradition, but he was raised in that hoity-toity English private school, public private school tradition, and believes in the 1912 Book of Common Prayer. I mean, he's an Anglican, what we would call up the street an Episcopalian, okay? But isn't this an amazing design on his part? He sort of transcends Islam and he creates something new. What I also think is important, that second level, we go to the Alhambra and the Court de Leones, the Court of the Lions, and look at these Nazarite Muslim hewn stalactite Munkarnis vaults, largely because of Keith Critchlow. Maybe not 100%, but he's an enormous influence on why I even wanted to go there with a group last year, and why I went there 20 years ago with my wife and her best friend and her husband, and have been there several times because of this sacred divine geometry. Look at this vault, this great octagonal vault of the Sala dos Hermanas, or the Two Sisters. It's one of the great rooms inside the Nazarite Palace of the Alhambra. And then I think finally, Critchlow as a divine geometer is part and parcel of a whole ecumenical tradition. I'm putting him at the top here, but Yehudi Menuhin, Ravi Shankar, Bill Moyers, who's this guy? Right here in the front row. And Joseph Campbell, and of course the East meets West in terms of music, but it's really about diversity and tolerance. If you love the art and the architecture and the music of a different society or culture, maybe you're going to be more tolerant. Then we can move on to the philosophy. And then I think he's very much part here of why we in this church embrace that. And I think we still, a little sliver because of Keith Critchlow, but of a whole lot of other things in the micro, macro, ecumenical look at things, why we're still a bastion of sanity in this town. Okay? I really think so. What we want to be careful of is something that somebody warned me about, which is called liberal fascism. Because fascism can come in conservative and liberal forms, where if you don't buy off on the whole orthodoxy of being liberal, then you're an apostate, and that's not a good way to be. And we want to guard against that, I think, in our congregation, of moving towards liberal. You know, the Buddha said moderation in all things. I think that's not such a bad way to go. I didn't practice that on Thanksgiving Day in terms of eating, but there we have it. So that's Keith Critchlow in about 42 minutes. Thanks, and what do you guys think?
Fantastic.
Just one simple question. What makes something a divine symbol for what you're sharing? Is it a longevity of seeing it in different places, or?
Well, in terms of what Critchlow is introducing us in Islam specifically, these sacred patterns, even on a tchotchke like this, are to remind us of Allah. Because in Islam, you're not allowed to show Allah. You're not even allowed to show the prophet. And when they do show the prophet in like a miniature painting, there's always a drapery or his face is covered. So we cannot understand nor know, nor should we represent the sacred Godhead. That is a tradition in Islam that comes from Judaism. I am that I am, you know, the burning bush, the first big superstar of the prophet world in the Pentateuch is Moses, okay? And even in the movie with Cecil B. DeMille, Yvonne DiCarlo, as Sephora says, to look upon his face would be death, okay? So we cannot know what the Godhead looks like. Now, what did we do? We did the great white throne thing, the wise guy with a white beard up on a throne that suspiciously looks like all the men in this room. Okay? So we created that image. And then in Hinduism, there's 33 million gods and goddesses, three major, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, were created, preserved, and destroyed. So in Islam, it's either Floriate or perfect geometry. And it's that 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 that they use to decorate their masjids and their floors and their domes. And it's all, Polly, to recall the greatness and majesty and incomprehensibility of Allah, of the One. By the way, the Hindus are also, believe it or not, monotheistic. Because even though they're polytheistic, it all goes into the same whirring blender and becomes the One, right? Which is sort of confusing for Christians. Wait a second, you know?
So is the Trinity.
Yeah.
That's confusing too.
So is the Trinity. Any other thoughts about, isn't Keith Critchlow pretty remarkable?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And so anyhow, as we're moving into this Christmas season, I think it's just really important to, if we say we're ecumenical, guess what? We also got to be ecumenical to neocon Christianity. We've got to be accepting of it. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, but there's a place for everybody at the table. So, anyhow, that's all I have to say about. Oh,
Question.
okay, yeah.
How did Critchlow gain so much trust within the Muslim world? He was
That I think is such an incredible question, and it's a 64,000. I don't know. I think it was from personal with that imam in Cambridge that was on the same bridge club, but probably it was getting to know people personally, which our 9 to Dying is really good at doing. We've gotten to know some people that we never would have known in the church if it wasn't for that mechanism. And what's it all about? Breaking bread, getting to know that we're all more similar than we are different. He was very lucky. He hit not just one, but a couple of home runs and maybe even grand slams, and then had that sort of inertia and was sought out after a while by people. Yes?
Did he study with Muslim scholars or people within the Muslim world?
Absolutely. He studied Jewish Kabbalism. He studied both Sufi, Shiite, and Sunni Islam. He studied, grew up in the Anglican tradition, studied the orthodoxy of Roman Catholicism, studied different forms of Hinduism, 3 different forms of Buddhism, amongst those Zen. When he went to the Ryoanji Temple, which is a Zen temple in Japan, it's a big rectangle of gravel that has rocks, sacred rocks set in it that recall islands in the inland sea. He was actually applauded when he came into the temple. This white guy from England, right? Which is sort of unusual. So they knew he was a star in Japan. Didn't even realize it. So, all right, you guys, I've run long, and I know a lot of you are going to go to the second service. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, here's 2 out of 3.
More than I do.
We got a big octagonal box back there.
There's our 3.
Thanks for that.
We don't want to leave anything.
Chuck, that was amazing. That turned out to be quite a sermon, actually. I like that.
You bet. Well, I didn't really need to go there. Well, I think we have to be like we've got the answer.
We want to know.
I think it's been got. Did it get recorded?
That's great.
I might go there next week.
Yeah, you can look to me now with the power of just the web. I mean,
I was. And if you had helped me as leader,
Appreciate your ongoing effort.
I'm saying mostly
it's a really nice
We've been influenced by it, but we don't know it's
right? I do that every year.
maybe not direct.